Are going live. And it looks like we are actually going live. Yes. Okay. Success. We are connected. And it looks like we're going out to YouTube and a couple of other channels. So this is Jeff Marsace, the Plain English Attorney, and I am here with Bobby Setzer from the Estate Planning Source. We're just testing out a couple of things for the whole broadcasting environment for us and for the Estate Planning Source. We said, what the heck? Let's go ahead and just do a live presentation and talk about something that we talk about all the time, which is the client process. So let me go ahead, let Bobby talk a little bit about what she does as the head of the Estate Planning Source.
Well, what I do as far as when I'm talking to people, or what the process
Well, I
is
mean, I,
for.
I know you do close to everything, and then you
Pretty
have
much.
people support all that. But I guess tell us a little bit about the Estate Planning Source and what it does and what its primary goals are.
Well, our primary job is to be a back office for attorneys. Basically, we sit and custom draft documents for the attorney
Mm-hmm.
at the attorney's direction for the clients. We have two different networks. We have the advisor network and we have the attorney network. The advisor will educate on concept, gather information, work in conjunction with the attorney. The attorney, of course, provides all legal services,
Mm-hmm.
and then instructs us on how to custom draft those documents.
Okay. That's succinct and to the point, and it's actually how I kind of got involved with the Estate Planning Source network. How I ended up learning about the whole thing is a totally another matter. And sorry, Bobby, you've probably heard this story so many times
That's fine.
before. But when I was in law school, it was actually even before law school, like 2 weeks before law school, that summer in between undergrad and law school, my grandfather passed on about 2 weeks before I had to load up everything in the car and drive off. It was like, okay, I ended up with my grandmother calling me on like the second day with questions about the estate because it was becoming this very frustrating thing for her that wait a minute, we had a will, I thought everything was fine, and now I'm talking with the attorney and it sounds like it's this huge process and it what's going on, and she didn't understand what was going on. And she was calling me because she was a proud grandmother and she figured I walked through the door and I had all the legal knowledge dumped into me. And I was already a hotshot attorney on day two. But okay, I ended up learning very quickly. There's one answer that any first year law student's going to give you to any question, and that is I don't know what the answer is. I'm going to look it up in the law library. And she was calling me because I could go through, do the research, figure it out, and say, here's what I think it means in plain English. The attorney would go on and on about the statutes, and here's what this process, and it was just overwhelming and confusing, and she was getting billed for it. Grandson's going to do it for free. Well, okay. About every couple of weeks, she kept calling with new questions, and I realized it's a year and a half later and she's still calling with questions. And I'm like, this thing still isn't done. Well, that's when I ended up talking to the head librarian and saying, look, there's got to be a way to avoid this. He's like, oh, yeah, there's this thing called a revocable living trust. Here's this book by Henry W. Epps III called The Living Trust. We don't have it. Go to the bookstore and buy it. And so I bought it. And that was really my introduction into the whole concept of avoiding probate. But then years later, a financial advisor who was in that network was like, yeah, I need a good attorney who knows what they're talking about on estate planning. And he's like, here are these documents. And I'm like, okay, this was like the sixth or seventh institution that was trying to, quote, get me on board with the documents. And frankly, they sucked until it was the estate plan documents. And that's when I'm like, okay, they really do have something here. And so it was at my first advanced institute that we met. And you were at that point in charge of setting up the Advanced Institute and some of the programming and making sure we had the speakers. And you were kind of like the wedding planner for the Advanced Institute, making sure everything happened correctly.
Yes, down to me standing in the back of the room giving you a 5-minute warning. Yes.
Yes. Well, that actually is a kind of important education piece for both attorneys and advisors. And I promise we talked about we're going to get into the actual client process, but tell us a little bit about the attorneys and the advisors interacting for the benefit of the client. How does that work? And then also the education around all of this.
Well, education is we provide not only basic institutes, but as you mentioned, the advanced, which the topics are different every year. The point is keeping our affiliates, both attorneys and advisors, current on any new laws, any concepts, things like that. That, of course, trickles down to help the client.
Hmm.
As for the first question, which I'm going to ask you to repeat,
Yeah, tell us how they kind of work. Well,
how
how
they
they
work
work
together.
together
Well,
on
ideally,
this.
your advisor and attorney are going to build a relationship where they know what the expectations are, they know where their boundaries are. The
Hmm.
advisor knows, okay, this attorney wants me to educate on this concept, with every client. And then what information that attorney is going to want me to gather while I'm taking my notes to give to him.
Hmm.
The attorney is going to take that information, establish the relationship with the client, and actually talk with the client, make sure that all legal questions are addressed, any customization that's needed. It's just they work as a team, and that ideally
Yeah.
that is going to benefit the client. It makes things go smoother, faster, um, and makes our job a lot easier in house too.
Yeah. Now, this is a very critical professional point is, and I've seen a lot of financial advisors in the estate planning source network who probably know more than
But
some
there are
of the
those.
street level attorneys that say they do estate
Mhm.
planning. It's more of a side gig for them. The advisors may even know more, but it's wait a minute. They can only provide education.
That's
They
correct.
cannot provide legal advice.
An advisor should never give. I don't care. Sometimes you'll get a client that's going to push and say, well, you've been doing this a long time. You know the answer. You got to sidestep that. You cannot tell them what they need. The minute you give them a recommendation or tell them what it
Hmm.
is that they need,
Yeah,
you're practicing law and you've crossed the line.
yeah. And I think the best example that I can give, and it's only because I see banks do this all the time, they violate this rule. Banks are allowed to say, okay, here's what an account that is joint with the right of survivorship, here's what it means. Okay, here's having a pay on death beneficiary designation on an account. Here's what it means. The bank person should never say, oh, you should put your kid on as a joint owner with the account. That's the line that they're crossing into
Hmm.
actually giving estate planning advice, as opposed to just saying, here's how it works.
Exactly.
And for a lot of financial advisors, that's kind of what they're doing. They're saying, here's what this means, here's how
Yeah.
this works. What's right for you, that's up for the attorney. Now,
Mhm.
when I work with advisors, I tell them just look, be upfront with the client. Of course, I know the answer. I've been doing this a long time, but
Mhm.
it's illegal for me to tell you the answer, and I don't want to get slapped around by the state bar. That's what Jeff is for. And even they
Exactly.
might even be able to just get me on the line and go ahead and answer that question for them directly. But it's that teamwork and
Exactly. You have to
them
build that
knowing that they can
relationship.
do that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's like, we've had a few since we moved the office to a new area from Reno to
Mhm.
here. We've had a couple walk-ins, which we didn't get a lot of walk-ins in Reno.
Yeah.
It's a big city,
Yeah.
but here a new business is gets attention, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so I actually let the attorney know. when I have an appointment with a client, which isn't often, but when it
Mhm.
happens, I let him know so that he knows that as there's a chance I'll call. If I can't
Yeah.
handle a question and it could mean the difference in helping the client, I will call him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also a good thing with the network is that we do have attorneys and advisors, and some of them excel exceptionally in a
Mhm.
particular area, and we'll go ahead, we'll back each other up. It's like, oh, so and so says they're this attorney or they're an advisor from New Jersey, and they wanted
Mhm.
to kick some ideas. Wait, is this someone from the estate planning source? I'm like, send them through, and I'll go ahead and talk about them and kick around these ideas. We do
Sure.
provide that guidance
And
for each other.
and sometimes attorneys have a busy schedule. They can't do that for the advisor. And what I do
Yeah.
in that situation is take notes. Let's write down these questions. And when the attorney
Hmm.
calls you, you need to discuss this with them. And so I
Yeah.
actually help them write out a list of questions to have when they have that phone appointment with the client with the attorney. Then
Right.
they can ask the attorney directly.
Yeah. Now, okay, let's start talking about the actual client process and how this can work together with the attorneys and the advisors. Now, let me lay out what I've always
Okay.
seen as here's the typical
Okay.
attorney advisor client relationship. The advisor provides education on here's what a revocable living trust is, here's what it does. Here, let's gather this information and write it down so we can then get it over to the attorney. Now, I look at that as, quote, the estate strategy session. That's really kind of the first thing. Well, maybe not the very first thing. There may be a seminar or there may be a recommendation to read a book or some other upfront education before you're actually sitting down with that financial advisor.
It's possible. It
The
depends on the way they do their business.
Yeah, the next step I typically see, okay, now the attorney is brought in because they've received the workbook and maybe they have some clarifying questions or maybe there's some things they want to talk about on their own. And then after that,
Hmm.
the attorney puts together the estate summary, which has just, it's the highlights of everything.
Hmm.
And the advisor will typically walk through that with the client. Is this correct? And wait a minute, do we have any questions here? Okay, if there are questions, we're going to write it down in the summary so that the attorney can look through it and get back to you.
Hmm.
Once all of that's correct, that's when they get the documents put together through the estate planning source.
Yes.
Now, I know sometimes the advisor and the attorney and the clients, they don't want to go and do it like an actual separate meeting for a document review. It's like, okay, yep, this is what we want. Go ahead, print the documents and bring it in, and they do a signing. And if that works, that works. Great. I always like to give an opportunity for what I call a document review meeting. And honestly, a lot of them are like 10 or 15 minutes long because they've only got a couple of questions. And it's a lot to read through. So, yeah, we only get a couple of questions. Occasionally, I get those hour and a half long stuff just more out of curiosity. They want to know about the generation skipping tax and what's this Texas and Florida homestead exemption. Okay, that's fine. We run through it. And then when there's a signing meeting where everything gets signed, and then there's a funding meeting. Now, for a lot of advisors, they're typically handling that signing and they may combine that with the funding meeting. I do it a little differently, but as we go through each of these steps, we'll talk about it more. And then that may be it. I add something that I call a family review meeting. It's actually just a good exercise that I've seen to bring in uh, like at least the first, if not the first and second successor trustee, run through here's what the different documents and what they do, and give them an opportunity to ask questions just so they feel more comfortable about the whole thing. Great. But that's the process going through estate strategy session,
Hmm.
estate summary, document review, signing, funding or signing and funding.
Mhm.
And then if you want, there's that family review. Now, like you were saying, attorneys and advisors, they're going to work together to see what's going to work best for them and their
Mhm.
clients. So what I'm just laying out, well, this is kind of how I approach it, but it's a lot of this have these elements to that
Well,
meeting
there's
at
one
night.
other really important thing that I think I'm sure you already do this, but
Hmm.
I think most advisors should do a follow-up appointment about a month or so after
Okay.
the signing, because what happens is they leave there, they're all like happy with what they got, or they have a list of instructions of things they need to get put into the name of
Hmm.
the trust. They have their own little to-do list.
Hmm.
How many don't actually go do that to-do list? How many clients don't
Yeah.
go get that bank account in the name of the trust or don't? And that follow-up appointment is just sitting down looking at their statements to make sure they did it.
Hmm.
And it's a way to
Yeah.
make sure that they don't end up going through probate in spite of having a trust.
Yeah. Uh, Let me wait till we get over to those later meetings and I'll
Mhm.
run through how I do it. Now,
Okay.
typically, this estate strategy session is what I call it. Some call it an initial meeting.
Mhm.
I've actually banned the words free initial consultation from my office because it makes people think it's going to be a sales pitch. Look, if you're coming to me as an attorney to do estate planning, you're already sold that you're doing estate planning. I've got some requirements on education up front that I have. Now, for me, it's I've got my book, Estate Planning Basics. We can send you the packet, send you the questionnaire. But what we've been doing lately that people seem to be a lot happier with, I've actually got the online course, freetrustcourse.com, that has digital versions of my book. It has
Okay.
an electronic fillable PDF with the questionnaire. And it's got some other materials, and there's actually a video that's a rundown of here's what the process is with my office. So it's a good education piece. And so the requirements to actually sit down and have that strategy session with me is okay, you got to read the book, or it's even an audio book. Sit down, listen, meditate, do it while you're cooking or doing dishes, whatever, fine. And fill out the questionnaire and get it back to me. If we do that, all right, we're going to sit down and we're going to spend the time talking about your goals, talking about the people you want involved, and get to the point where we've got enough information to put together that summary. Now, a lot of advisors, they're doing something similar. For me, when I work with the advisors, I'll actually still do that initial estate strategy session and have those materials. Uh, they're happy that I'm taking that off of them for the financial
Right.
advisors. And again, we work so well together because we've established this relationship that that's what works for us. It may not work for every advisor and attorney team.
Right, exactly. And if not, maybe the advisor will be doing more of the education and strategy point
Hmm.
without answering legal questions on some
Exactly.
scenarios. It just depends. And that's why that relationship is so important.
Yeah. Now, I know there are probably even some attorneys and advisors, if they're like within close geographic proximity, they may even want to do that first meeting together if it's what works for them.
It's up
So
to them.
it's entirely up to them. All right. So then the next meeting is the estate summary meeting.
Mhm.
So this is where, this is the way I tell it to my clients. It's like, look, there's a lot of stuff and documentation. There are a lot of law firms that I've seen out there that they're not doing an estate summary. It's like, okay, I've got the information that I need. Here's 200 pages of documents to look through. Oh my gosh. Everything just kind of shuts down because it's so overwhelming. It's like,
Right.
whoa, wait a minute. The estate summary, that's like 10 to 20 pages, right? I know sometimes it's called a mini summary on
Right.
your end. It's only 10 to 20 pages, but it runs through everything that gets talked about in the strategy session. Who are the people doing different things?
Right.
Here's how the estate flows. And it, again, it summarizes it So for my clients, the next phase is getting the documents to review. It's so much easier because it's now all in context. And we've had an opportunity to walk through, here are the things going on with the estate summary, and maybe there are some changes. So tell me what you see there before I kind of give my comment on trying to simplify things.
Well, that's how it works. So basically, they review that summary and understand that who's doing what. And
Yeah.
if that's accurate, then we can move forward.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I'm the plain English attorney. I try to keep it as simple as possible. Uh, I don't ask, well, who do you want to be your successor trustees? Let's come up with a list of three. Who do you want to be your power of attorney? Let's come up with a list of three. Who do you want to be the executor of the pour over will? Let's come up with a list of three. Now, look, those jobs are so similar, require so much of the same skills, and it all needs to coordinate. So, why would you ask those three separate questions and come up with different people?
Right.
Sometimes I do get, well, they have a list of different people for trustees, it's whatever. Oh, no, no, no. Look, we want this to kind of come together. So, your successor trustee, if you become incapacitated, they're taking over the assets in the trust with you as the beneficiary.
Mm-hmm.
Your power of attorney for finances, that's the list of people who are taking over and handling anything outside the trust, like IRAs or 401ks, and signing tax returns and applying for benefits. Why would those ever be different people? It's kind of the same job. It's
90%
just
of
you've
the
got
time,
two.
they're going to be the same.
Right. But occasionally I get a list of here's who are the successor trustees, and it's different when I'm getting that initial workbook with the power of attorney. So we try to synthesize that and come up with the list financially.
Right.
So the advisors that I work with, they know this, but that is so close to giving legal advice. They go, no, no, no. I'm just going to let Jeff take care of that.
Right.
Okay. So then after the summary, it's the document review. So this is where the estate planning source, really excels. You've got some good creative people there working on the drafting at the instruction of the attorney to come up with the right language to fit the client goals. And then you end up, the way I work anyway, it's send me the PDF of the document so I can send it to the client. I've reviewed it, and then we can go with whatever questions they have.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that process that you have inside the estate planning source, or even
As
if
far
you've
as the
got some
custom
weird
drafting,
stories. Yeah,
oh,
or even some
heck,
weird stories.
oh wait, there's too many. I've been doing this 25 years. It's the point of it is though, whatever the attorney's going to know which type of language, and
Mm-hmm.
being around as long as we have, we've seen almost everything. So depending on what the situation is, if the attorney says, okay, well, I have this situation and I need incarceration language, okay,
Mm-hmm.
fine, we have it, we put it in there. So it's really case by case basis. Then
Well,
once it's
okay.
done,
You have to explain that term for most of the audience. What is incarceration
that
language?
means one of the beneficiaries is in jail or are potentially going to
Mm-hmm.
be in jail. So we need
Yeah.
to restrict their benefits.
Okay.
Um, that's just one example. There's hundreds of different types of language depending on different scenarios, and the attorney just has to work with us and let us know what's needed, and
Yeah.
we probably have something for them.
Yeah. Now, this calling back to about a month. Gosh, it's already been about a month ago. Uh, I did a presentation to HD Reach. It's an organization in Raleigh, and it's support for individuals and families with Huntington's disease.
Okay.
And one of the things about Huntington's is someone is not incapacitated, and unable to make decisions according to the legal definition. But there is this phase where they are competent, but the disease makes them very reckless,
Okay.
socially, relationship wise, and financially. And so there's custom language that we've developed that would go in here about here's what a doctor would have to find in order to remove them as the trustee. And it's not full-fledged incompetence. And it's because we know that this is something that they could run through and waste everything in their trust, even though legally they're not incompetent. They know enough ahead of time on the planning phase. This is the
You have to put
criteria
that
that we need
language
to have.
in. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So that document review meeting is something that I look at just to make sure. And this was, again, every attorney and advisor working together, they're going to have their own process.
Mhm.
But for me, I had too many clients come back to me a year later after everything's done, everything's signed. I didn't know this was in here. This isn't what I wanted. Well, wait a minute. We went through the summary. Here's what this said. This is exactly what you said. Well, but I didn't know this language was in here. And they were expecting me to change it for free. It's like, okay, that document review meeting, it's not just a way to cover me, but it's to make sure that they, as much as they want to, understand the language and what's in there. And there are a couple of points that always come up in that document review meeting, and it gives me an opportunity to tell stories. Bobby's heard this one to death, but you may not have out there in the viewers. And I get, what's this Texas and Florida homestead exemption? And I end up going all the way back to the O.J. Simpson murder trial to give this example. It's like, look, his personal attorneys, not the criminal attorneys, went to O.J. Simpson and said, look, dude, you're going to be sued. Doesn't matter if you're acquitted, doesn't matter if you're convicted, you're going to be sued. So what can we do to protect you? Well, what they did was they liquidated everything that he had and dumped it into a mansion on the side of a golf course in Florida. Well, why did they do that? Because Texas and Florida are the only two states that have an unlimited equity value in your quote homestead. That's exempt from lawsuits and bankruptcy. And so he put all his money in there so it couldn't get taken out by a lawsuit. All the other states and jurisdictions, there's an equity limit on how much you can have in your house and still claim it as exempt. But those states say, well, okay, if you're going to put that real estate, your homestead, into something like a trust, you have to have language stating that you are retaining that homestead exemption in order for it to still have that protection and still be inside your revocable trust. So I tell my clients, this is not me advocating for you going out and murdering anybody or getting in a big lawsuit. But if anything does happen and you happen to have, at that point, you're living in Florida or Texas, your homestead is covered even though it's in your revocable trust. How likely is it to happen? Not likely, but I'd rather have that contingency planned for.
And then the simple answer to that question would be that this is a national document. To have
Well,
Texas and Florida recognize that document, we needed to have that language in there as well.
I could have said that, but it wouldn't have been as entertaining as
It would
talking
not have
about
been
the
as
OJ
entertaining
trial.
either. But there is you're correct. But the simple, if someone just wants to address it simply,
Yeah, there you go.
it's a national
It's a
document.
national
You have to
document.
have the provisions in there so that it is recognized in all 50 states.
Yeah. Now, that brings up a really good point about, quote, national documents.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I really like the estate planning source and how they did it. They looked and found those kind of quirks in the law that might be there for individual states, drafted everything into the trust so it's going to cover these things nationally.
Yeah.
If you're doing a downloaded document, they're shrinking stuff to the point where it's so simple. Oh, but it's accepted in all 50 states. Yeah, but for most, if it's in writing, signed, and possibly witnessed, it's a valid trust and it could be horrible. We've
Mhm.
got these thin trusts that are out there that, oh, it's good nationally. Well, it's not good. It's just national.
Right. It, but this is, you know, what we do.
Yeah.
And what's nice is our documents are also have the ancillaries, which are state specific
Yes. So it's not just a trust, it's a whole complete kind of estate planning system or
package.
toolbox.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So that document review meeting, like I said, for me, for most of my clients, and in this process, I'm handling the document review meeting. Now, the advisor may be handling the estate summary meeting. That's fine, and they'll defer whatever legal questions. If it's going through the language of the trust, it's like 95% of those questions are going to be legal in nature. So it just makes sense for me to handle
Right.
that meeting with the clients. And so that's in this process, that's what I do.
Right.
And then after that, there's the signing. Now, for the signing, I've seen people combine this with quote the funding meeting where they go everything and go over here's how the account should go into the trust, or here's how they really do that as an exercise in that same meeting. I've seen most of my clients when I try to do that, they just spent a half an hour signing documents. The eyes are glazed over. Nothing's really sticking. It's like, okay, look, I do that as a separate meeting.
Right.
So in this process, financial advisors are typically running the signing process and they've got staff or witnesses. And I've also seen advisors do this. They'll actually go to the client's home if the clients can bring in some neighbors to be the actual witnesses for these legal documents, and they handle it right there at the kitchen table. Again, it's whatever's going to work for the attorney, the advisor, and their clients.
Right. And the state regulations, there most states will allow the advisor to do the execution of the documents, but
Mm-hmm.
not all. There's a couple states that
Right.
the attorney must be present at the execution.
Yeah. Now, thankfully, in my state of North Carolina, we're not requiring that yet. We did move over to that attorneys have to be present in all real estate closings. Problem is, in North Carolina, all of the real estate firms, the paralegals were the ones handling all of the paperwork. And so you've got these situations where, excuse me, there's the attorney of the day. They're on closing duty. They're sitting there in the meetings. And anytime the clients ask a question that's mainly related to their particular case, the attorney doesn't know. They look over to the paralegal who handled all the paperwork and they go, what's the answer? Oh, yeah. Okay, that sounds right. So the attorney doesn't really need to be in that type of closing for that. But look, state law is state law. We're going to
Exactly.
comply with it and we're going to make sure everything gets executed the right way. Right. So for me, we do that signing. And again, it's usually the advisor who's handling that signing. The funding meeting. This is an area where it really is critical that the financial advisor and the attorney are collaborating. Now, in a lot of cases with the advisors, they're going to make sure they're gathering all the information. I've even put together videos with the stories on things that people forget to put down in their forms, and I'll run through it. And those advisors, well, they've got access to that. So a couple even will play those in the funding meeting with the clients to make sure we get a complete list. And then we'll work on those funding recommendations together, so that for each and every account that has a title to it, every kind of asset that has an ownership papers to it, we're addressing, should it be put into the name of the trust? Should the trust be the pay on death beneficiary? For tax or other reasons, is there a different beneficiary designation that makes more sense? We run through all of that so each item has in writing, here's the recommendation, and the clients get that. Now, between that being a good focused meeting and coming up with that list, the point you made earlier about that checkup a month or two out, usually it's the annual meeting that we're
Right.
having. So we schedule an annual meeting from the date of the signing. That's when my office is getting in touch and saying, hey, we should get together and make sure. Now, either my clients haven't done anything, or they've gotten about 3/4 of the way through and just something just stumped them, or life got in the way. And the annual meeting is the reminder, the little bit of a kick that says, okay, time to make sure we're getting this done. And for most of my clients, I keep advising them come in annually just so that we can make sure that everything is the way it is. And yeah, I'm going to tell you the whole boring story again. Um, this was about 10 years ago. And it was one of the major banks. I don't want to call them out just in case it was one or two, and one of them kind of got it very wrong. They wanted to institute a $5 per month ATM fee added on to the bank accounts if there was a debit card that could access an ATM. Whether they actually used it or not, they were getting charged $5. And oh my gosh, everybody went bananas and started pulling their money out when they saw that new fee. What are you talking about? I didn't use the ATM at all, but well, no, this is standard whether you use it or not. Oh, you think so? I'm taking all my money out. For that whole next year, when my clients came in for their annual meetings, and I'm thinking, oh, do you still have this checking account here? Oh, no. Did you hear what they did? Yes, I heard what they did. We went right over to this other bank and we we put our money there. It's like, okay, did you set that up in the name of the trust or in your individual names? We were so upset with the other bank, we didn't even think about that. And this is where that ongoing collaboration with the attorney and the advisor makes a lot of
Life
sense.
happens.
Yeah. Two sets of eyes on this and being aware of that just makes sense. So yeah, we're also big proponents of the kind of family office, especially now that everybody's using Zoom and other techniques to stay connected. Having the attorney, the financial advisor, and the accountant, and maybe even the property and casualty insurance person collaborating on your case once a year, even if it's just this quick half an hour meeting online to make sure everything is still where it needs to be, that makes a lot of sense because those professionals have their own perspectives. Okay, so yeah, and that's the funding meeting, and we talked about the annual one. Now, I mentioned this family review meeting. It's just an opportunity for question and answer from whomever my clients want to bring in. And like I said, it's usually just the first and second trustee, and it's an opportunity for them to feel more comfortable about being in that position. Now, again, different attorneys and advisors do different things, but for me, it's about just making sure that they're comfortable with it. And if they realize at the end of the day, okay, just get that big blue binder and then call the attorney and call the advisor, we can make sure that everything gets done the way it needs to get done. So that's the purpose of that family review meetings. Are there any additional meetings or different ways of doing it that you've seen that were effective for people?
Well, I've seen them actually take that family meeting
Hmm.
and turn that into basically a marketing thing where they actually then discuss, you know, educating the trustees or the family
Hmm.
actually turns into more leads to help other families. So
Okay.
I've seen advisors take that family meeting when they're sitting down to explaining everything to the family what's been done as an opportunity to help the other family members.
Yeah. And this is kind of the way it used to be. Um, I think in the research that I've done and the people I've talked to, prior to the Great Depression, families always talked about here's how the inheritances are going to work. And here's how we're collectively going to look at handling things like taxes and whatnot. But it was kind of like you hit that Great Depression era, and all the generations since, it's like, no, we don't talk with our parents about money.
No, we don't
And the
talk about
parents, oh, no, no, we don't talk to the kids about money. And I think there might be this opportunity in bringing the family together on estate planning to also help coordinate taxes in a better fashion. And just one quick example, look, if the parents are in a very low tax bracket, but they've got a bunch of tax deferred money, and it's okay, here's your minimum that you have to take out of your required distribution. Well, they could take out more. Yeah, there's more taxes, but not in a higher bracket. Whereas if it goes down as this larger chunk going to the kids, now suddenly they've got to take all of it out over a 10-year period. They may be getting slammed with taxes because they're still in their prime working years. The families can talk about those issues and see, does it make more sense for the parents to take out more money and the kids can help support them in other ways as an exchange? So the only one that comes out behind is the government. And none of my clients seem to be worried about making sure that Uncle Sam gets more money. Okay.
understandable.
All right. So, anything else you want to talk about in terms of that whole client process? I know we've talked a lot. We're almost at
Oh, this is
45 minutes.
no, I think we covered everything. It's that the process, if the relationships are all set up and everybody does their job and knows their job, it goes very smoothly. Um,
Okay.
the turnaround time and everything goes so much better for the family.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you, Bobby. It's Bobby Setzer from the Estate Planning Source and this live stream. So, we're going to check and make sure everything came out all right. And I hope you got some good information out of this. So, as I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great